We're going to examine three species of human. Starting from the left, we have Homo erectus. In the middle, we have Neanderthals. And on the right, we have us, Homo sapiens. Well, let's start with Homo erectus. Well, Homo erectus compared to earlier hominins has a much larger cranial capacity. We can see that the post-orbital constriction is not as pronounced as what we've seen before in Lucy. Let me grab Lucy for you so you can see. So we can see that extensive post-orbital constriction, that smaller brain size. Let's put both of these specimens next to one another so you can see that difference in terms of cranial capacity. And so Homo erectus is one of the earlier members of our lineage, the genus Homo. And Homo erectus has a certain set of suites that are quite distinctive. For one, they tend to have these massive brow ridges or supraorbital ridges, to the point where you could balance a pencil on top of these brows. It may be difficult for you to see, and I'm going to try and angle it. There we go. You can see how the top of the frontal bone is kind of pinched up. We call that feature a sagittal keel because it typically occurs along the sagittal plane, the same plane that we see the sagittal suture, the sagittal crest. If we turn the skull to its side, we see that it's shaped kind of like an American football. It's very elongated, it's long, and if we look to the back of the skull, we see this really pronounced muscle and ligament attachment point called the occipital torus, sometimes called the angular torus. If we look at the mandible of Homo erectus, we can see that the mandible has a distinctive parabola shape. That's quite distinctive from earlier hominins like Ardipithecus, for instance, that had a more rectangular shape, a shape that is more commonly seen in chimpanzees like we see here. So this shift to a more parabola shape in the dental arcade is a feature of the genus Homo. Moving on to Neanderthals. Well, Neanderthals lived later in time but did overlap with Homo erectus. They have really large brains, and many Neanderthals have larger brains than modern humans do today. We can see that the overall shape of the skull is similar in lateral view to that of Homo erectus, but it is much larger. And we don't see that angular torus or occipital torus, that bar at the back of the skull. Instead, what we see is something referred to as an occipital bun. So you can see how it bulges out at the back of the skull itself. A feature of Neanderthals is a relatively large nasal opening, which you can see here. And this comes together with what we would refer to as midfacial prognatism. So if we were to once again grab Lucy, we see that Lucy, her face is projecting or prognatic lower in the face, whereas in Neanderthals, it tends to be around the midface. And this reflects the fact that Neanderthals had quite large maxillary sinuses, so that part of the face looks puffy, like it's puffed out compared to modern humans. We still have a distinctive brow ridge, but Neanderthals tend to have more of an M-shaped brow ridge rather than horizontal brow ridge, which is often common in Homo erectus. Well, let's finally look at modern humans. Well, how are modern humans distinctive from Neanderthals and Homo erectus? Well, we also, like Neanderthals, we share the characteristic of having a large brain size. Not only is it large, it's also very rounded. So the overall shape of our skull is more like that of a soccer ball rather than that of an American football. It's more rounded overall. Modern humans typically don't have an occipital bone. Instead, we have a more rounded occipital bone. The frontal bone is very vertical. It's also rounded. When we look at the front of our skull, we see that the face itself is relatively small compared to that of the rest of the skull, particularly the brain case. You may notice how there is an angle formed down here at the bottom of the skull, which reflects the fact that our faces have shifted position to be tucked underneath the brain itself. Gone is any sense of postorbital constriction, and instead that part of the skull is increased in size, reflecting an increase in brain size overall. Another distinctive characteristic of modern humans is the fact that our faces don't puff out like that of Neanderthals. Instead, we have what's referred to as a canine fossa, this depression that we see here and once again over here. Another distinctive feature of modern humans is the fact that we have a projecting chin, a chin that projects outwards. Other early hominins, like say Homo erectus, lack a projecting chin. Instead, the chin slopes down, like we see here in Neanderthals, or can even slope backwards, like we see with Ardipithecus.